really a tremendous honor and privilege to be here and to talk to the 8 young men in particular who are graduating today. I want to make sure that I give a thank you to, of course, Dr. Norm Jones, who called me a year ago and asked me if I would participate in this program. And I said, but of course. And I'm so happy that I responded that way and that I was asked. So thank you. To Dr. Bylander, I thank you for your tremendous concluding experience with the Men of Mandatory this morning. I certainly was inspired by what it is that you said, and hopefully there'll be some overlap in what it is that I discussed today. And of course, President Durden and the Africana Studies Department as well for kind of helping to sponsor my travel from Atlanta to here. I've been teasing with Norm, and this is really daunting. I've been teasing Norm over the last 24 hours at least about how fatigued I am, right? Because I didn't just come here to speak today, right? But I actually came in, got up at 6:30 yesterday morning, drove myself to the airport because my beloved wife and son did not want to accompany me to the airport at 6:30 in the morning. I got there. I travel a lot. I travel so much that I recently got a Delta Sky Miles Silver card, and I think that it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? And so I went to the folks as I got there early, and I said, excuse me, I was just curious the likelihood that I will be upgraded to first class on this flight because I do have a silver. And they said, brother, there's no first class on this particular flight. I knew that. Landed here, and as soon as I landed, Norm was outside ready to pick me up. We came, we talked, he prepared me for what the next 2 days really were going to be like, and it's been such a reward. I'm tired and fatigued, and I shared this with some of you all, well, with all of you all last night, not because of the kind of frenetic pace that I've been keeping in spending time with you all here at Dickinson, but because of the real heavy lifting and substantive work that you all are doing. I gave a lecture yesterday. I met with the Wellness Center yesterday evening. I sat in on your conversation with President Durden last night. And all of that stuff was tremendously draining. And the reason that it was draining is because it's work, right? It's work. And I talked a little bit yesterday about how a lot of the titles that we have, this idea of being diverse and inclusive and tolerant, which is a word that I don't particularly appreciate, and coupled up against, you know, looking at quote-unquote minorities and things like that. But all of these things necessitate work if you're really doing it right. And I'm very pleased to be included in a program that seems to be doing it right. You know, if you're going to the Wellness Center to talk about, okay, how is it that we make sure that these men of color in particular are well served at Dickinson College, that suggests that there's something that's being done right. If the president of the institution is going to set aside time on a Friday to sit down and talk to you about his idea of leadership and how it is that he thinks he can authentically engage and identify with you, that's an indication that things are being done right. It takes a lot of energy to do things right. Okay? So I just want to say how proud and pleased I am of you all for stepping up to the plate of being here for 8 weekends in a row and doing everything from hiking the Appalachians to looking at economic finance and stuff like that. I mean, that's a lot of stuff. But it requires work to kind of get in touch with yourself in an attempt to get in touch with community, right? Howard Thurman says, who is, you know, someone who I love, right? Howard Thurman Baldwin, so The Price of a Ticket, of course, resonated with me when you were talking this morning. But Howard Thurman says, community, wholeness, integration. When you come to yourself, you come to your Father. When you come to your Father, you come to community. So the way that you all are beginning and are working to define and carve out and maintain this sacred space that you'll have not only in this immediacy of where you are now, but beyond the walls of not only, you know, of course, this building, but beyond the walls of Dickinson. That's heavy work that you all are doing that I'm so in awe of. And my friend, Caleb Lehman Jones, has reminded me that I didn't give him a shout out in the beginning. I want to thank him. All right? You guys really are raising scholars. 4 months old out here. You better sit and listen to this lecture. So I've not even gotten to kind of my points, but I want to make sure I do because I'll quickly be rushed off the stage, I know, or the podium. I was so in awe of what it is that you all are doing here and looking over your rigorous schedule and kind of experiencing you all yesterday and hearing the presentation this morning. I'm like, and I even said this last night, I was like, what am I going to talk to these young men about, considering that they've been talked to so very much and have done so very much? And it seemed like a theme that I kept coming back to and that I've mentioned over and over again over the last couple of days, last 2 days, yesterday, today, is to be, right? Be. That is more challenging, unfortunately, than it should be, right? To just be yourself. Because the society and the context within which we live suggests that being yourself is not enough, especially if you're defined and relegated as being a minority, right? And I always like to put that in quotes, right? A quote-unquote minority. And that word offends me a lot, because what it suggests is that you're minor, right? The word in and of itself, the definition of it, you know, the placing of that on your chest or next to your name suggests that you're not as significant as the larger body politic or the larger group of people. And we know that that's not the case. But because we are defined as minorities, oftentimes it's suggested, and is not suggested, it's said that being yourself is not enough, but it is. And you all are doing the work and will continue to do the work that suggests that being yourself is not something that is easy to do, but it's something that you have got to do. And you've got to do it because you're interested in being leaders, which is what you just talked about. Right? So you have a responsibility, because what you've been done and what's happened with you all is you've been placed in a space and in a context and in an environment that many people don't have the opportunity to be in. It was said before that you all are the exception. I respectfully disagree with that. Respectfully. You all are the norm. The thing is that you all have different experiences. You're in different spaces. Okay? And that's how we have to make sure that we consistently understand how it is that we live in the world. Because the world has us hierarchically defined, right? Because you went to college, that means that you are somebody. That's not the case. You went to college, you're able to go to college because of the tremendous sacrifice of others who came before you, right? So you have an indebtedness and a responsibility to those individuals to make sure that you don't contribute to these Eurocentric, patriarchal, heterocentric, white supremacist, Eurocentric, did I say Eurocentric already? Yes. Paradigms, right? Because what happens is you can so easily, at Dickinson, I'm sure, you can so easily fall into the chasm of saying, okay, well now I've made it. I'm mandatory, I did my 8 weeks, I know that I'm a leader now, and I'm good to go, right? I'm establishing more, and I'm good. I've expanded our understanding and definition of what it means to be a man. Now let me get that corporate job, get some money. Sure, there are protesters down occupying Wall Street, but I'm golden, right? Because that's what the arc and the template of capitalism suggests that we're supposed to do. And it's hard to push against that. So, again, I was at a loss, it doesn't sound like, right? But I was at a loss for what it is that I was going to talk about. Like, what am I going to say? Be. Okay, well, being becomes important. And not only be, but don't whistle Vivaldi. Don't whistle Vivaldi. Don't just whistle Vivaldi, I should say. What does that mean? What the heck is this guy talking about? Well, Claude Steele, who's an educational / social psychologist, has written a book, right? He wrote a book some time ago called Whistling Vivaldi. This guy named Maddox, who does work at Tufts University, has capitalized on this and talks about this idea of stereotype, right? So we all know that stereotype has some type of impact and imprint on society writ large, right? We understand that. Well, what they've discovered through some research, a large black man, not Claude Steele, but another large black man through his research in Chicago determined that when he was walking down the street toward a white woman, that there was a certain type of stereotype she probably had about him, right? Because of his phenotypic expression. The presence of melanin, the thick lips, the wide nose, the kinky hair. There were these ideas about who and how he was. And so what he did was, as he approached her, like, maybe he'd done this 2 or 3 times, let's say, just for the sake of argument. He'd done it once with a group of folks, and they grabbed their purse. With another, he was walking down, they crossed the street. He's like, what the hell is going on, right? It's called racism. So he didn't really ask, that was a rhetorical question. So then, the next time, he started walking, right, and he said, okay, well, what if I whistle Vivaldi? That seemed to work. Folks gave him a nice howdy do, how are you? Maybe even said, I love that song, and walked on, I'm embellishing here, for example, right? But the idea is that because he was able to augment the context of who he was within this experience, he was accepted, right? He was embraced. Well, it's all good to be able to code switch. We have to be able to do those things, right? We have to be able to make sure that when we go in and we want to secure a job, that we're not going in our pajamas, okay? We have to know how to present ourselves so that we're able to leverage these positions toward freedom and toward, liberation and all these things that leadership entail. But for you to define yourself through the lens or within the context of another is a mistake. Because what you do is you lose who you are, right? So many things suggest to us, again, like I said earlier, that we're not enough. The suggestion is that you should whistle Vivaldi. Fit yourself to what it is that social norms are. But if the social norms are not developing or nurturing you, what you have got to figure out how to do is how to be true to yourself and how to find and carve out what your cultural norms are within this larger cultural superstructure. That becomes difficult. How do you maintain fidelity to who you are when everybody around you suggests that you're not enough? Well, sometimes it only takes 8 people. Right? If you have one another and are able to walk on with one another and understand the validation that you had among one another. I heard the president last night, he said, he shunned validation because he was a first-generation student. He said that, that validation, he always kind of drove on and walked on. And I understand that, right? But I also think that it's important to figure out how this is being recorded because I'm not sure I'm able to come back. But it also becomes important for us to understand that the president of this college is a white man. And so he has a certain amount of capital to where he can say things like that, right? He has privilege. Right? So no matter what his compromised circumstances are, at the end of the day, he's able to wipe himself off, put on a nice bow tie, step into the room, and effectuate change, not just because of the presentation of who he is, but because of the social norm that he occupies. Okay? Validation is important if you've been invisible for a lifetime. That becomes important. And you have to anchor yourself in being validated in appropriate ways, right? And in ways that are going to allow you to affirm just being. Okay? Just being. Okay, so I didn't know what I was going to talk about, right? I still don't. I do now. But I didn't know what I was going to talk about, so I began looking through my Moleskine tablet. That sounds so elitist, doesn't it? I was looking through my notebook, right? I think they're so cool and they're neat. When I was in graduate school, I used to like to carry my Moleskine because it made me look like a PI or a real journalist, which is what I was in school for in the first place. And I have hundreds of them and never complete like the entire book, right? And so I was flipping through the Moleskine that I grabbed before I went out the house yesterday morning at 6:30. And as I was leafing through it, I saw notes that I had from a meeting last year with Miriam Wright Edelman and Jeffrey Canada and Pedro Noguera and Edmund Gordon. Edmund Gordon is my mentor. He's this 90-year-old educational cat who's like friends with Kenneth Clark and W.B. Du Bois. And I keep waiting for him to say, you know, David, you remind me of Du Bois. He's not said that yet. Really try and hang around him just so, you know, try and get him when he's half asleep or something like that. So I was in the room with all these giants, and it just felt so great, right? And so we were in the room, and we were talking about men of color, right? We were talking about men of color. And the question was, how do we get them, men and boys of color, to lead and to enable democracy? How do we get them to do that, right? And so in the dialogue, I know some of the notes that I made, because I was looking again in the notes that I was making, and because these guys are like superstars, you know, I'm nervous. So I want to make sure, how am I going to write this just right so I can give my suggestion of how it is that we have these young men, you know, be complicit in their democratic process. And so what I say frequently is engage and be there. Engage and be there, right? So that's something that Norm Jones and the rest of the team for Mandatory have done. They've engaged you and they've been there. And not only that, but Norm made sure that I was engaged in here. We were talking as he was walking me across the street to a closed bookstore. I was saying, you know, Norm, I really appreciate this opportunity because I get to talk to these guys and have some sense of the community within which they're operating, right? Engage and be there. So I have some type of capital to be able to talk to you. I didn't just get off the plane and say, hey, you guys are doing great, I'm so proud of you, and I'm out, right? You get to kind of experience what's going on. So engaging and be there. So in the same way that the mentors are here, right? The folks who've been in Mandatory before have come back and are here. You see how much that means to the folks, the 8 young men who are in it now, and you look at kind of this role modeling, engaging and being there. That is part and parcel, and I'd say in large part whole, of how it is that you get this kind of pathological and deficit-oriented understanding of men of color to evaporate, to dissipate. That becomes your responsibility to push it back. You've got to be there, right? But not only being there, but being present, right? Being in the moment, understanding what's being said, understanding different perspectives, and allowing them to marinate with you. And one of the things that I think is so important that we oftentimes get caught up in, especially within the academy, is this idea of reason and logic. Now, what do I say? I mean, you know, we're at in the academy, so what do you mean that you get caught up in reason and logic? The thing is that reason and logic are tremendous assets. You have to have a good argument, right? I didn't get a PhD without being able to reason and logic, right? Being able to be reasonable and logical. I just see somebody, you always get paranoid about this, you just see somebody from your school in the corner being like, really? Is that how you're going to say that? Let's recall his letters, right? But you don't get to that point in that way. The thing also that becomes very important is to feel. Is to feel. You've got to be empathic. You've got to understand. You've got to be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. A lot of what people of color, men of color, in particular, because they are in direct opposition to the white, male, privileged norm, experience is oppression. The thing is, where does that oppression come from? It does you well to be empathic towards the individuals that are putting barriers up in front of you. You have to understand it. Right? Because if you understand it, you better understand the strength that's within yourself. Who's ever heard of the Willie Lynch letter? Willie Lynch letter is this letter, it's debatable as to whether it's true or not, but it basically was from a slave owner that talked about how it is that you maintain a slave. And it's principally done through 3 things: fear, envy, and distrust. So if those things can be imparted into communities, into people, into groups of individuals, so that there's infighting with one another, so that there's this degree of competitiveness and all that kind of stuff, it'll take care of itself. You can go about the business of running the country, quote unquote. Right? It becomes important to see how is it and where is it that the blocks that are in front of you are a result of individuals actually who are afraid of your power. And then being able to tap into that power and to be able to negotiate the system in a way that leverages you and community. So I thought that was interesting. How do we get that? How do we get them to lead and to enable democracy? Well, you just got to be there. Right? Miriam Wright Edelman has been there. She is there. Right? You got to be there. Edmund Gordon has been there. He's there. Jeff Canada, however critical I might want to be in some aspects of what it is that he does, he's there. He's in the community. He's there. You get to be critical on the other end if you're there, right? You get to work with folks who are in the community and say, I don't agree with that if you're there, but if you're just somebody who's out there, who's beyond, you don't get that, latitude. Another meeting, right? I'm a scholar in residence for this thing called the Gordon Commission, which is headed by my mentor, Edmund Gordon. And really what he's interested in is he's interested in looking at assessment and how assessment can be more effectively utilized in teaching and learning. Right? And so what I have the opportunity to do is I get to shadow him and go around the country with him and all this kind of stuff and sit in rooms where people are talking about assessment. So I get to sit in there with the Gates Foundation and talk to them and with the folks from ETS and with big time governors and all that kind of stuff who are over all these tremendously impactful school districts and things like that. We were in a meeting in September in DC, right? And all these folks were talking about, look, this is what's wrong, this is what's going on, this is how we have to better help these young folks, and this is where we do this, and this is not working, and there was all of this tremendous articulation of the problems and the issues. Beautifully done, right? Done in a tremendous way. And I feel like a fish out of water because I'm a personality psychologist by training. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, these educational paradigms that you guys are saying don't work and all that kind of stuff, I dig it, I hear you. But I raised my hand and still, a little anxious because of the folks who were in the room and because my mentor is there and I'm always nervous speaking in front of him, right? But I said, okay, so you all have told me how all this stuff works wrong. Can you give me an ideal scenario where it works right? It was as quiet as it just was 2 seconds ago. Right? Because conventional thinking and conventional wisdom suggests that you need to look and deconstruct the problem. But where is it that you can find functional models of what works? I dare say that this is a functional model of what works and how it can work. Right? Mandatory is a tremendous expression of how it is that you develop engaged leaders who were there, who were present, and who were able to push against these norm models that suggest efficiency and pathology. Being there also necessitates, and I want you all to carry this with you, this becomes very important, I touched on it in the beginning, but it necessitates that you don't attach yourself to the culture of other. And you don't culturally other individuals and people, right? So what I said initially is that you can easily come in and say, I went to Dickinson, I have this degree, I have this experience that's associated with this degree, and you can differentiate yourself or point to those folks over there. Anytime you find yourself talking about them or those, you really want to make sure that you do a firm examination of where it is that you're standing and how it is that you might be complicit in the oppression or marginalization of others. That's certainly something that you cannot do, being who you are. And not only that, but being exposed in the ways which you've been exposed here over these 8 weeks. So you always want to make sure, I'm interested in discourse analysis and narratives, and so I think every space that I've been in, somebody's talking about how narratives are important and all that. I love it. I love that. And so what you have to make sure of is that in your narrative, you have a narrative of cooperation and collaboration. Right? When I do research, the research that I do does not other the individuals. Right? I work with them. The type of research and experience that I do is with the community. And I think that it becomes very important for you to adopt and be able to negotiate that in your lives, in your living work. Got that? What am I looking like, Norm?
Almost time.
Okay, thank you. See, he's got to be honest with me. I told you I'd go on for the rest of the day. Dr. Bylander said, when she first began speaking this morning, she was talking about the reason that she was a proponent and helped to facilitate this program is because the world needs good men, right? And so I think that we all agree with that. And the world needs good men, and I kind of added on to this to fight the good fight against hegemony, white supremacy, Eurocentrism, heterocentrism, racism, and misogyny. These ideas that are really birthed out of fear, doubt, and envy. Okay? Again, don't be the cultural other. You want to make sure that you connect yourself to a logical rooting, but also an empathic rooting as well. When you begin to live too much in the world of materialism, things happen that are terrible. I don't mean to pick at a sore point, but when you value economy, when you value a football program, when you value entities over individuals, evil seeps in. And what happens is you come to a point where you begin to rationalize these horrible judgments, and you excuse them through logic and reason. And then lastly, I want to say this. Here you all are with tremendous potential ahead of you, with tremendous achievements behind you. You are the good men that we want for you to be. And you have the capacity to continue to be the good men that we see you as. But again, it's going to take engaged work, right? And I heard you all give mandatory a lot of credit. And I think credit is due to them. But don't give them too much credit. Don't give mandatory, don't give Dickinson College too much credit. When you're talking in language, and again, I just, I oftentimes zoom in on language and words, but when you zoom in on things like saved me, they defined me. No, you did that. You did that. There was a space that's provided for you, but you did that. And I think that what becomes so important and what really is so tremendously powerful for you all as men of color who also enjoy a level of privilege, is to understand the privilege that you possess, but also the agency that you have. You get to make choices. You get to decide that you're going to be the type of man that you all are modeling yourselves and working toward right now. So it's all wonderful to be thankful and to point to folks who have led you in the direction you're in. You have to reward and give honor to your ancestors and to your peers. You have to do that. But don't lose yourself in that. Understand that you all have a capacity that is tremendously powerful, and make sure you hold that dear and close to you when you recognize it. So lastly, I say, allow these young men to be free. That's what being is. Allow these young men to be dynamic and full and whole, and allow them to be visible in meaningful ways. I love you all very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.